ethos in society in general, which is very like everything happens for a reason. And I've always thought everything happens for a reason is a really toxic sentence.
Welcome to another episode of No Books on a Dead Planet. If you are anything like me, you know that the climate conversations are happening somewhere out there with all the smart people, and you're kind of sitting in there being like, should I join in? Should I not? What would I even talk about? So this series is about me trying to picture life on a planet without books. I can't even compute it. Not going to happen. I refuse to let that happen on my watch. So I'm inviting lots of amazing, incredible people onto the channel to make me read the books about climate that I am terrified to read and have those imperfect, missing pieces conversations about the climate and try and make sense of it somehow. Everybody is welcome. This is a book club where you don't have to have read the book, but two people who have read the book, because we are Hermiones, is me and Michelle. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. And yes, I am exactly that kind of person. This is officially the first book I have read on climate change, and that's awful, but it was for the exact reason that I felt stupid talking about it, so I didn't particularly want to read about it.
And you were perfect. I was like really hoping that you would say yes to come on, not because you're somebody who I intuitively knew hadn't read climate books, because to be honest, who knows who those people are, but more because you are incredible. You're one of my favourite non-fiction authors. If you haven't, if you're thinking that Michelle's name sounds familiar, it's because Michelle Elman is the author of loads of books that I recommend on this channel, one of which being The Joy of Being Selfish. And you are so emotionally intelligent when it comes to these kind of conversations that are awkward, that are hard to navigate, where there's no good or bad people, there's just a lot of information and how to filter it. So I was so excited that you agreed to read a book with me, so thank you.
Well, I'm glad you asked me, because it's one of those things where it just goes on a to-do list of like things that you're like, I should get round to learning how. I don't know, even stuff like politics overwhelms me sometimes, and like I am the kind of person who gets overwhelmed and shuts down and just is like, okay, that's going in a box that's never going to be touched. And as the book says, and many books say, and I know this is a thing that a lot of environmentalists say, just like a small difference will make a big difference. But then there's the element of the people or the group of people who are very extreme, and you just get scared off by that, and so you kind of just like don't even want to dip your toe in, when actually like also this being quite a short book was actually the perfect book to dip my toe in.
Yeah, it is actually probably the shortest on this series so far. It was really incredibly short, to the point where even I was reading an ebook and I thought I still had loads to go, and then I realised about 60% of the way through it just turned into sources. Like most of this book seems to be sources and index at the back, which I love from a research perspective, but also as a reader I love, because the book was over way sooner than I thought it was going to be. Did you find that?
I've got the physical copy, and it's a small book, and I carry small handbags because like big handbags I can't carry because I have like chronic pain in my shoulders. It's the first book that's fit in a handbag, and so I was carrying it, and also I could actually, even when I was doing small journeys, so like my gym is like 20 minutes on the tube away, I could read a whole chapter in one journey, which just from a dyslexic perspective, because I'm also a dyslexic writer, like is so accessible, which was like, it was just the perfect book to start off, where it was like, at no point in this book did I feel intimidated by the writing or the content. And I think sometimes, even if the content's not intimidating, the writing is at such an academic level that like, and I've done a university degree, but I don't find it fun to read academic reading. And it's still not my forte, so to find a book that was accessible and humanized it, actually I think this was the perfect book for us to talk about, because like I never considered the environment in terms of like, so the main thing I'm focusing on at the moment is like communication within my work and my content. You never think about the fact that actually you need communication when working with like political leaders and things like that. And that was the one of the things I thought about while reading this book, was like, actually, how you know how like in romantic relationships you're like, it's how you say it, not what you say. Like, actually, it's the same thing with environmental stuff. And if someone had spoken to me differently about the environment, would I have been more open-minded about it and not felt like I was being judged as soon as I tried to do anything?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's, again, it's like we think of the experts as like just robots who are just churning out facts and doing the right thing, but they're also flawed humans with their own baggage and their own trauma and like making sure there's environments for everybody to communicate properly. And you're right about the university degree thing as well, because I've always feel a lot of intimidation and shame around that, because I know there was a point in my life where I could read an academic text and understand it, but it is a muscle, and if you don't use it, it goes, and I literally don't know what's happening a lot of the time when I'm reading like big physical books. And also it makes me chuckle to think of like the massive big tome like climate books as being like ableist. I'm like, it's too big. How are we supposed to carry these things around? What's going on?
It's also just like the general principle that then seeps into publishing of like, if you use the fancy words, if you use the big words, and like the number of times in my university degree I got told you're not a good writer. If your English was better, you'd get a better mark. And I was like, I'm doing a psychology degree, I'm not doing a degree in English. Like, stop judging my writing. And so it's funny because then you become an author, or like I became an author, and everyone's like, oh, help me finish my dissertation. I was like, not the same
you
thing.
Like, you misunderstood.
Yeah. I was like, my dissertation got written in the last week it was due, and it was not good. I cannot write academically, but I can write in very simple English how to set boundaries, for example.
Yeah, it's not the same. I don't know what, it's kind of like, I don't know, asking a crime writer to like embalm a body. It's like, I work in death, but like not that kind.
Yeah.
Very different. So yeah, I wanted to ask you if you'd heard about this book before you picked it, and why you picked it. Because basically when people come on, I give them a long list of books that I want to read, or part of me wants to read and part of me wants to avoid forever, and I get them to pick which book. So you picked this book. It's a short one. That was definitely part of it. Why else did you pick it?
That was definitely part of it, I won't lie. And the other part of it was the subtitle, which, okay, I'm singing the praises of this book. I don't understand how the subtitle fits in.
I thought you would say that because I felt the same, and I actually did a little bit of research, and I've realised that since they published your edition of the book, they've changed the subtitle. The subtitle was, in your version, Climate Justice, a man-made problem with a feminist solution, which is a great subtitle. And then now it is Climate Justice, Hope, Resilience, and the Fight for Sustainable Futures.
So this is a marketing ploy?
Yes. It's a lie. It's not really about feminist solutions.
This was written on the book so that I buy the book. It worked, and I read the book, and I was like, I picked this because I was like, how does feminism come into the environmental stuff? And I was like, and the first few chapters I actually thought, oh, I can see where this is gonna go, and then it didn't go there, and it was just, how I would describe this book was like a collection of 10 stories, individual stories of how climate change has affected individuals, with an overarching message that we should talk to the people who it affects the most. And that's how I would summarise this book. Feminists can't mention a single point.
Yes, and the first 3 or 4 examples are women who are working at a grassroots level within their communities to make change. But there are also some men. And I was like, who are welcome, but unexpected.
But so, because the first 3 were about how basically women who didn't have any experience in being a leader or all of that stuff then mobilised themselves to create change in their tiny communities, I thought the stories were going to lead to, and this is how you can do it in your own, or like why there's a certain difference with a feminist point of view or something. And I think until when I got to like the 4th story, I was like, oh no, this is just a bunch of stories.
They're very short articles, aren't they?
Yeah, but I quite like that, and it did have a good message. It was just, I found the subtitle a bit misleading.
It was how small stories fit into big stories about climate change. That's kind of like how I describe it. There was a point that I was trying to rectify the subtitle and see if I could find stuff that was actually about feminist stuff. So there was one part where Constance, who is like basically a small scale farmer from eastern Uganda, and she talks about how domestic violence is on the rise, and one of the reasons is because women have to travel farther and farther to fetch water and firewood. Some men do not understand and beat their wives if they spend too much time away from their homes, which is a point. But I'm sure there's lots of other stuff, and that was a great, I think reading about Constance's story was so interesting, but I think there's probably a lot of other stuff that wasn't in the book.
There was, to me, what I was also expecting was like an epilogue that would like draw to the subtitle and be like, and this is why it's feminist, to kind of justify the middle. And even that wasn't there. And I was like, oh, like, because you know how sometimes you have it with a title in a book as well, and then the introduction will explain the title, or like the epilogue will be like, and this is why I chose the title or whatever, but like in less obvious ways. There wasn't even really that. But again, I thought that the Constance's story was the same in that I learnt within that story that the majority of farmers are women, which really shocked me. And I was like, I did not know that. Because just, I mean, maybe this is me gender stereotyping, but like, because men stereotypically are bigger and stronger, you would think that they would do most of the manual labour. But I guess, I don't know what jobs that leaves for then the men.
I don't know either, but I think there's probably some kind of historical patriarchy there, but then maybe it's something that I'd love to read more about. I kind of want to just take the parts of the book that I didn't know about and go and research those further rather than the whole thing. I agree. And I think also there was interesting stuff in her story about how there was for a very long time when the climate was changing really rapidly in her area, lots of people were attributing it to spiritual stuff. So like God was punishing them, they hadn't appeased
that
stuff
was
like that.
Fascinating to me, because also that really reminded me of this whole, like, we have an ethos in society in general which is very like everything happens for a reason, and I've always thought everything happens for a reason is a really toxic sentence, and I hated it personally because I had a lot of surgeries growing up, and because everyone kept saying that, like, in a way to say like you can make something good out of your surgeries. I took it to mean I did something to cause my surgeries. And so when I read the book, I was like, this is why everyone needs to stop saying everything happens for a reason. Because within the book, what they basically say is like, they thought that they had done something wrong and God was punishing them with the weather. And like, that just breaks my heart, because I was like, it's not your fault, you didn't do anything. I mean, even as a country, it's not your fault, because it's the developed countries, and you can't control what they're doing.
Yeah, it's kind of like we need to replace that in a vocabulary with something like every effect has a cause, or like, you know, dominoes. So it was interesting, but also heartbreaking for her to talk about how she went to a climate conference and learning all about the real causes of why her land was changing and why her village was changing, and then having to go back and explain. And then the villagers confused asked Constance whether the people in other countries around the world who were causing the pollution would come to their village to help. Constance knew better than to promise the relief of strangers from afar. I told them that I didn't know, but instead we should just try and help ourselves. And that, again, I was just like, that does make sense. If you hear that strangers who are very far away are causing it, you're like, all right then, they probably should get on a bus and dig in. Like, come on.
I don't know whether it was Constance's story or another one where she said, like, I feel bad blaming other people for it because we are of one blood. And I read that sentence. I can't remember the exact quote. Should I find the exact quote, actually?
Yeah, do it. Because it's that thing of, like, they seem to have a different understanding of personal responsibility, which I think is healthy, but also probably not.
It was Constance's story. So she said, I learned that overpollution from developed countries had caused real changes to the climate. She later recalled, I felt bad because I knew that the people in developed countries are our friends. We are the same people. We have the same blood. And not to be cynical, but I read that sentence and all I could think of is, would the developed countries look at you in the same way? Like, that sounds so bad, but it's kind of true that, like, there is this, like, dismissal of anyone who's in a, like, third world country where it's almost not real, and you kind of see it in, like, how wars are discussed, not to make it, like, really political, but, like, you saw the increased level of compassion for Ukraine compared to other countries. And I read that sentence and I was like, God, it breaks your heart that, like, she has so much compassion. And, like, sorry, but I look through everything through a psychology lens, so I just, like, read that sentence and I was like, she has so much compassion for developed countries that is likely not being reciprocated, and she probably isn't aware of that because she just looks at people through a compassionate lens.
And it's hard to then communicate that and communicate that to people who aren't reciprocating that compassion and be like, you owe this to people. This is something that you owe. And I think as well, like, something the book does that is interesting is when we talk about, like, I think there's a lot of narrative around the climate where it's like, are we gonna live or are we gonna die? And it's like, well, what do we call we? And also there are lots of spectrums of success, whereas in, like, if we keep warming below 2, like, a certain amount of things happen. If we keep it below 1.5, a certain, and it's not that everybody's lives will incrementally get better or worse. It's that literally we'll lose some countries or we won't. And like the gravitas of that, again, is probably one of the reasons why I avoided books like this, because I'm like, just having to say a sentence like, we'll lose some countries is just horrific to even talk about.
And it's heavy, and like we already live in quite a heavy world where if you are living in a developed country, it's so easy to bury your head in the sand. And like, I'm guilty of it too. I've done that. Like, I try to do what I can with the environment, like on a personal level, but in terms of educating myself, not really done that in any way. But I think what I liked about this book was, like, from the outset, she was welcoming in the fact that she also said she was I think she called it a late bloomer. She was a late bloomer to the environment conversation. That I was like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. And this was a leader of a country at one point, and she also didn't know like a lot about it. So everyone has to get to their own stage at whatever time. And I try not to be judgmental of other people not knowing things about like body positivity, for example, because like everyone will get to their own stage with it. But if we keep judging people and we keep shaming people, which is also why within the book I was noticing the points when she was talking about the UN and the conversations and how bringing these people who are real life, like in their real life were affected by climate change, actually like softened the hearts. And it was like a twofold feeling, because it was like, yeah, I get how that feels in terms of like, I also was just a little bit shut down from it, and actually if you open your eyes a bit more, then you're able to understand the severity of the issue. But then also like, and this is like almost hypocritical of me to say, but why should they have to open their eyes to it? It's like not their job.
Yeah, I think that's that kind of holding a few people up and being like, you need to represent these kinds of countries and bring a tear to the eye so that people will act is quite...
Like you have to put, like, if you don't pull enough heartstrings, you won't create any change. It's like, why is it their job? Like, they're the ones
like children in need on speed.
Yeah. And I was like, and that's happening at the UN? Like...
I think as well, we didn't explain who Mary Robinson is. Mary Robinson was the first president of Ireland, which we've just discovered/discussed is very different from being a Taoiseach, which is a whole... I'm sure our Irish viewers will educate you in the comments, but she was the president of Ireland for a while, and she's very, very well connected, but like you said, she didn't come to the climate conversation for a long time, and now that seems to be all she's focused on. But I don't know, I think it's interesting because basically this book was commissioned because she's a name, and she was like, I'd like to give some voices to some other people, but I don't know if I'd rather if this book have just been written by those other people. I don't know how you feel about that. It's like kind of like, oh, we need to listen to their voices, but then this book is actually written by her.
I mean, that's the whole problem. That's the whole problem with the publishing model in general. Is like, you're not actually going to people who have the knowledge. You're going to the people who will sell the books so that you can point to the where people would go to the back of this book, for example, and then read books by actual experts, but then they would only find those books because they don't have the same profile as Mary Robinson does.
Yeah, it's like whether this book exists within a funneling system or like a flow chart in the back of like a magazine where it's like, go here and then you can go here.
And also again, you have a quote here and a quote here of a stat and whatever, and you can Google it yourself.
Yes, there is a certain element, I think, of like white marketing that goes with that. Would you say that's fair?
I think if I tried to dissect my own psychology of why I stayed away from this conversation so long, is I felt there's a level of helplessness in the conversation, which I must say this book didn't help, because there was no section in the book which was and here's what you can do. So to me it's a lot of heaviness with no solutions, which then doesn't really empower you. And so it's kind of okay, now go off and do your research and do and I understand that's me also being lazy, but I think you have to accept majority of humans are lazy, and so even if it was a tiny chapter at the end of bullet points you could do, that would end it on a note that actually encourages people to take action and doesn't mean you just get left with this heavy feeling of the world is going to burn to the ground and we're going to have nothing left, and just like that feeling isn't very motivating. It sounds so silly to talk about like climate change and talk about like how you have to motivate someone, but there's literally a sentence where she says this movement is not about making you feel guilty, it's meant to make you feel inspired that we're all doing this together and that we're all just trying to do our best. So she does acknowledge that. And there's also a section where they talk about the UN and how you talk in so in this section they're talking about they just met in Copenhagen, and that meeting had made Tong, who was one of the stories within the book. So the part in the book says, Tong tried to understand how to broach the topic to a skeptical audience, not only at home but also abroad. I had to change how I was talking about the issue. You don't listen to somebody who accuses you of doing the wrong thing. I had to make other countries realise that it's not just my problem, and their problem too, whether they like it or not. But even then, it still took a long time to be heard. And it's just like, a sentence like that was just like, God, it's still about like phrasing it in the right way to be listened to, but then I'm guilty of it too, so
yeah, it's hard. It's almost like I kind of have joked on this series before that I'm just like, if you want to help the climate, maybe train as a therapist, but I'm also like, maybe train as like an honest marketer, because again, like I think there's this human psychology of how to talk to people about it, but then also feeling like you shouldn't have to persuade people. I think there's a good quote that I pulled out that was like, this isn't aid or charity. In the fight to tackle climate change, it is enlightened self-interest. Which again is that skewing of like, because you talk a lot about selfishness and joy and like actually to help other people, you kind of have to be a bit selfish sometimes. And I wonder if there is like a self-interest to the climate that we're missing when we market it.
Oh, 100%. Like, you need to do this to stay alive. But the problem is we live in a world that like wants short-term gains and like who want those wins immediately. And because the win with climate change is not going to be short-term or any time in the recent future, that's not even a term, it's not going to be anytime soon. It's the long-termness of it. Like, even if we take something as basic as diets, like if you said to someone, you're going to get this weight loss, but you have to wait a year, like no one does that. They want to take that stupid diet pill, which is not going to work, but at least they're going to get a quick win. And then it doesn't matter that they're going to gain it all back in a month. They care that they have the quick win now. Like, that is human psychology, and I think maybe we do need more psychologists within that conversation to be like, this is how you encourage people, this is how you inspire people, and this is just from a like how humans think perspective.
Totally. I like that analogy with weight, because I'm kind of like, so like switching your plastic straw for a paper straw is kind of like taking a laxative or like doing a 30-day shred. It's like, that's not going to help you.
Or actually, the good example is like, so that diet pill is going completely vegan 100% overnight and deciding you're going to be vegan, cut out all meat. The sustainable thing would be, let's cut down your meat by 50%, by 10%.
Yeah,
like, it was even, I remember someone said to me, like, it's so stupid, and I'm going to sound really thick right now, but I'm going to say it anyway. It never occurred to me so I'd heard the example of, why don't you eat meat 4 times a week instead of 7 times a week? Like, I'd never heard of the example of, why don't you put 1 breast of chicken in your meal instead of 2 breasts of chicken? And
that's a good point.
I'd never considered that, and I was like, that is even more realistic than like, and that's still reducing meat, but it's just reducing, you could eat it every single day if you want, you're just eating a smaller quantity, or like you substituting half a chicken breast for broccoli instead, or whatever it is. Those kind of conversations, I was like, see, if we didn't go so extreme with everything, we actually would have those conversations. How many people do you think could easily swap 2 chicken breasts for 1 chicken breast when they're eating a meal? Like, almost everyone. Like, you would spread out the amount of meat you have for the week for the people who can't afford it, and like, that would make sense. You're like, fill the rest with pasta, fill the rest with broccoli, whatever you want. Or even just like, I remember I went through a phase where I went vegan, but for like medical reasons, and I was drinking almond juice, and almond juice.
That's what it should be called.
I was drinking, I don't think that would taste very good. I was drinking almond milk, and as I was pouring it, someone was like, you know, that's worse for the environment than regular milk. And I was like, I mean, that's not why I'm drinking it, but okay. And like, I was like, of course, it's a minefield. You can't do anything right. And then what's worse is that almost, especially with vegans, they're worse to themselves. Like, if you, a lot of the vegan community go hardest on the people who are already trying to do somewhat.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you're going to burn the people trying the best, and like, usually it's often like the leaders of the community or the people who've like praised it and then they've realized it's not like working for their diet or it's not good working for their mentality, and they dial back their veganism. And they get sent like proper hate and abuse because they're no longer sticking to it. But I was like, surely they're better than the person who has never even thought about their meat consumption.
It's the human thing to like want to kick the person who's nearest to you. I was reading the book, and I feel like this isn't about the book. This is more the way I'm reading the book. Whereas I'm also getting more intimidated because every example in this book is from somebody who's exemplary, because otherwise they wouldn't be in the book, right? So they're the people who have read about climate change, started a movement, started some kind of industry or company or something that's going to help. And then I'm reading the book and thinking, God, if I really cared, I'd start a movement. Or like, I'd found an organisation. Where's my charity? And making it this individual thing where it's like intimidating to even start because you're like, I want to... But that's not what the book's trying to do. And I guess also if I was going to look at the book in a different way, I'm like, this is lots of stories of people who have stayed in their field. They're talking about their country or their level of expertise, like farming, and they've stayed there. They haven't gone out to something that they didn't know about. So I guess, I don't know if there's something there to learn that's just kind of like, you don't need to go out and...
I think when I read about those things, even when I read about like anyone starting a business, I just want to know like practically what was the first step. Because like when, especially in the first story where she started a whole movement within her village, I was like, but how? Like, how practically do you... And I think that's the part which, like, always stops people from actually taking action. It's like, great, it's a wonderful idea to start a charity for climate change or whatever. How do you actually... Like, do you establish a company online? Does it act like a company? Like, it's literally the minutiae that I always get hung up on. And so then, like... Or, like, if you were trying to introduce recycling in your neighbourhood, for example... Do you call the council? Do you call, like, who? Do you get what I mean? Like, in the book it says, her father's words proved seminal for Jani, who decided right then that she would pursue a higher education so that those in authority would engage and listen to her. I understand that the people who had all the vital knowledge, the Sami, my people, were not heard because they were not well enough educated in the Western system. They had no voice even though they had critical information. Like, that just, like... made me so sad, but also just like is so nonsensical that you have to be educated in a traditional system. Maybe I'm biased because like I'm not trained in traditional psychology, or I'm partially trained. I dropped out. Well, I didn't drop out. I did my BSc and then I didn't go further. But it's this idea that the traditional education system is the only education system that is valid, or even trying to associate intelligence with qualifications and training when it's like they are living this every day. Surely they are the people to be listening to, but you want some letters after their name to convince you to listen to them. Like, that to me just like made me so angry.
It's like you don't need a geography degree to tell you that it's raining outside. If people can witness things and be like, it seems to be raining, and everyone's like, no, you wouldn't know anything about rain.
But also, like, I don't know whether this is the wrong word, but like there seemed to be almost like a level of racism around Indigenous people, assuming that they're stupid. Like, and that, again, they don't have qualifications, therefore they're stupid. They can't talk about this stuff. When, like, you don't need to be educated on it to be able to talk about it. And I think it's almost like a version of gatekeeping of like, you don't know enough science to talk about it, when actually like, and it's the same thing with someone making a comment about my almond milk, or it's someone coming on my Instagram and going like, you do know that's fast fashion, and I'm like, okay, find me something in my size. Why don't you talk to the sustainable brands and ask them why they stop at a size 16? Like, why are you coming to me? I'm not the person who's decided that. Like, if I actually had sustainable shopping, I would buy that if I could afford it. But you making this assumption for me that either I don't know because I'm stupid, or I do know but don't care, or that you've not thought about the other possibilities. 1, I couldn't find something in my size. 2, that they don't do plus sizes. 3, that someone, like not me in this circumstance, but someone might not be able to afford sustainable fashion because we have not given them the same options, especially within plus size or like in maternity, for example, as people who are straight size are. And it's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy of like people who assume the whole world thinks like them, and then and you learning a fact one day and then looking down on everyone who didn't know that fact tomorrow. Like
it's the kind of like insecurity that projects onto the people. It's like, just because I think there's probably just this whole thing where everybody is either judging themselves and not feeling invited to the party because they aren't qualified, or people who have actually witnessed it, which is a form of qualification. I think that's more important than that, is actually having witnessed it and experiencing it, and then not being invited, even though being a witness to something and experiencing something is a qualification. Like, it is. So basically, we all need to storm the party. Is what I'm saying. There's going to be a massive party crashing thing here.
But I also think it's what you said about the shame part, because if you feel so judged about the environment, when you learn that tiny piece of information that makes you feel better than everyone else, and like, oh, I'm actually doing something. When someone is pouring the almond milk out and you know to drink oat milk instead of almond milk, like, you are going to be like, oh, did you know? And it's like, you might not intend it in the way, and you might not even know consciously you're doing it, but actually if you looked at the reason why you're doing it, it's because you also don't feel like you're doing enough, and therefore you project it on everyone else. So like, weirdly, it's a level of like self-awareness and psychology that is involved in all of this, and I don't think I actually realised it until I read this book.
Yeah, that it's kind of about working out, because I think you're right. Sometimes I think I've done that where I've just learned something about the climate and I'm like repressing it, and I'm like, don't talk about the climate right now, don't ruin the party, and then there'll be a little valve, a moment where I could say something, and then suddenly it like all comes out at once in a really awkward way where I'm like, well, actually, did you know? And it's because I'm not regulating my own emotions around it, and I'm not like, if there's a space where I don't feel comfortable talking about it, I need to go away and create that, and like not just like project it at a time where nobody's in the mood to hear it. And
you know what, sometimes you are in the mood to hear it. So I remember someone told me the other day that like avocados are the worst for the environment. I did not know that. Like, to me, there would be no reason why I would know that. Like, I didn't know that it's like devastating to the environment, but like, I also assume because it's a food that a lot of people, especially in vegan and vegetarian communities, eat, that if it was that awful for the environment, they wouldn't eat it. But then I'm like, maybe they don't know that information. Like, so it's a hard catch-22, because you do want to spread the information, but I also think you have to balance it with like doing your own action and then informing everyone about it, and also like ultimately respecting the fact that if someone isn't ready, and I know this is so hard if you're so passionate about it, but like, if someone isn't ready to know, they're not ready to know. And like, the only thing I can compare it to, because I'm not well versed in environmental stuff, is like when I first learned about body positivity, I was like, oh my god, diets are like a trick, they're just trying to get you, and capitalism, and like, and I wanted to shove it down everyone's throat. Frankly, if you're not interested, they'll take zero of it in, and also they'll start getting annoyed because you're talking about what you want to talk about all the time without actually like gauging whether they are interested, or like, and you think by like continually bringing it up that's going to create change, but you're the one who wants to create the change in your own life, so you need to like have that excitement, have that passion, but fuel it into something that actually requires action, and not just more conversations that indulge this illusion that we're doing something about it.
Totally. And you're right, I think the times where I've like changed my mind is when I'm more like talking to a friend and I'm like, oh, what's going on with you? And they'll tell me something, and it is something around something they've changed about their lives or something they've gone to, and it's part of the story of their week or their day, and it's not something where they're trying to tell me what's in their head. They're telling me the contents of their calendar, or like, do you know what I mean? Like telling, and it becoming a story rather than a preaching thing. It also reminds me of, like, I think you talked about this in The Joy of Being Selfish, or maybe it was just something on Instagram. You have all your wisdom's coming over from all these different ways.
I create too much content on too many platforms. It's a problem.
Yeah. Something about, like, when you're trying, you can't just tell your friend to, like, leave a toxic person, or, like, they're not going to listen the first time around. You don't, like, it's not going to be something where you just tell somebody to and then they leave. It's often when you're trapped in that cycle, you kind of have to come to it on your own terms and in your own way. And I guess that with the climate as well, it's not going to be you who, like, says that thing and is like, you need to leave fast fashion. He's a bitch. He's abusing you.
So yeah, within that context, one of the things I say a lot is so if someone's dating someone horrible and you want them to leave, you being like, he's horrible, he's horrible, he's horrible, is not going to do anything. And you being like, delete his number, all of that doesn't really work.
Dump his ass.
And also what usually happens is your friendship is the one that gets affected, because they don't feel comfortable or safe now to tell you the honest truth. And actually, especially in an abusive relationship, that isolates them even further. How that would happen within, like, environmental conversations is I actually felt more distance from a friend. I went on a holiday for a week and every single thing I did was about the environment, and it just shut me down. Like, I would order steak on the menu and it would be like, oh, actually steak is better, like, or no, I'd order fish and it's like, actually it's better for the environment to order steak than fish. And I was like, I have a thing around people commenting on my food choices because I have a disordered eating past. So I'm like, even if you'd said that not in the context of me actually about to put food in my mouth, I would have maybe been more receptive. But it carried on for the whole week, and it didn't make me want to pick up an environmental book. Yeah. And so in that context, what you can do is go, oh, I'm actually really interested in the environment right now. I've been learning about it. I'm so passionate about it. And if you ever want to have a conversation about it, I'm your girl. Like, I'm learning all of this stuff. Do you want me to tell you anything? Do you want me to tell you about it? Or, like, what's your relationship with the environment? Actually asking a question rather than just like, because when someone's passionate about a topic and they first learn about a topic, a lot of the time they talk at people and they're like, do you know this? Did you know this? Even if you just turn to your friend and went, have you ever read a climate change book? I'm reading one at the moment. And actually the number of interesting conversations I had because I was reading this book, and like one of them was like with my boyfriend, and I was like, oh, it's an interesting book, but like I don't understand how like feminism comes into it. And we had it's the reason he won Trivial Pursuit, because he didn't know that Ireland had a president, or only thought had how do you pronounce it?
Taoiseach.
He only thought it had a Taoiseach, not a president. And so it turned into an interesting conversation. But like, that's an easy way to bring it up. But as soon as someone's like shut down to it, stop the conversation. You're not making any progress by continuing to hammer it home. And it actually might make someone feel more shame and more guilt. Which, like, especially around food choices, like people don't have different relationships with food, and sometimes their mental health, sometimes their disordered eating is going to take a priority over their meat consumption or any of the other things. And so it's not always a viable option for everyone, in the same way that it's not a viable option for everyone to shop sustainably, because if they don't do your size, they don't do your size. Like, you can't change that. So talk to the brands rather than talking to the individual who's already insecure about the fact they can't fit clothes, and who's already trying their best and already trying to do Depop and all of these things. But even trying to find plus sizes on Depop or eBay or all of the second-hand places are so difficult, because thin people like to wear oversized clothes. So there are no options left for us. So like, I think it's just understanding that more human approach of like, what if we looked at the world thinking everyone was trying their best, rather than everyone's stupid, everyone doesn't know what they're talking about, and I know more than everyone else.
It's interesting, because I always think like, oh, maybe the world is split into like people who think the world's getting worse and people who think the world's getting better, and I've gone between those two things a lot. But I think you're right in that sometimes there's people who care about the climate, but they also think that everybody's out to get them and everybody is evil. So do you know what I mean? And I think honestly, maybe a more optimistic mindset is like everybody's trying their best. Like things are getting things will get better. People are doing what they can. Probably makes you a better communicator, because I think people can almost sense when you're thinking the worst of them.
Yeah, and I also think, like, you don't know what else is going on in their life. Like, if someone is struggling to make ends meet, they're not thinking about their environment. The only reason a lot of these people are thinking about their environment is because it directly impacts them. So when you're living in a developed world, but you're still living under the poverty line, like, it might not be your first thought. If you're in a toxic, abusive relationship, it might not be your first thought. Like, but looking at it from that compassionate lens, actually thinking, well, the go-to assumption shouldn't be, if you do nothing about it, you therefore don't care. Like, it can, there's a spectrum, and I was a person who cared. I just probably, like, if I'm being fully honest, probably like cared but wanted to be in denial, because I knew if I read a book about it, I'd have to care more. Like, and so I think actually that's probably the biggest section of the population, at least in the first world, where like people are just like, it's a lot, it's overwhelming, so shut down, like, let's not talk about it, and like, let's pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think, as with lots of different kinds of worries and traumas and anxieties, putting it under the carpet only makes it mold and grow and like fester, which is why like I've enjoyed reading these books, because even though some of them are really stressful to read, like it almost feels weirdly calming, because at least I'm facing it. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like being a hoarder and going in and being like, okay, I'm gonna clean this corner.
So the only way I justified my guilt was, I was like, I'm already doing without the knowledge, I was doing as much as I humanly could within my realm or world, and being conscious of the environment. So like trying to recycle as much as possible, and I was taking the action part. So I was like, the knowledge doesn't really matter, because I know it's not good right now, and I know it's not getting better. So like, that's all the knowledge I need to know now without like it overwhelming me. But what I can do is like the day-to-day, like, do I really need another outfit, or can I wear something I already have, or like can I find this secondhand? And if I can't find this secondhand, don't beat myself up, because actually I've already like done this and done that, and or the chicken breast thing, like that actually is a thing that I practically put in my life, and those things I sort of made me feel better about the fact that I wasn't very educated on climate change. I was like, well, at least I'm aware of it and taking action, but do I really actually need to know the specifics of when we're all gonna die? Like,
do I need in graphic detail? I think as well, there's also different kinds of education, because people think a lot about like those big picture really scary things, but you could also just go and educate yourself and read about like like I said, like which fruits are better and less imported from different places, or like how you can be more effective within what you're already doing, rather than like research doesn't always have to be about the big scary.
So that was another thing I learned recently, which like I learned all of these things because I've never read a climate change book. I've learned all of these things through someone mentioning it in a conversation. So I'm not diminishing like all the random mentions about the environment, but one of the things I've never thought about is like, look at where the fruit is actually from, or look at where the vegetables are actually from, and shop locally. And I was like, never thought about that. Or like, it's even better to not shop in a supermarket. Like, never thought about that. Those are things which, like, if we stop being so judgmental and shame ridden, we could actually have those conversations a bit more. Like, it sounds stupid, but the chicken breast thing blew my mind, and I was like, I have never considered that, and it's like so obvious. And also, if I said I was going to cut out meat on a Tuesday, like eat meat on a Monday and cut out meat on a Tuesday, or I was going to say I'm going to have meat on Monday and Tuesday, but I'm just going to have one breast on Monday and one breast on Tuesday, and not two breasts on Monday, like, it's the same thing, just like it's a different option. And it blew my mind that I was like, never thought about that. So like, I was making something the other day, and I was like, oh, I can actually put tofu like in half of this instead of, and I was like, it's just different people work in different ways, and when you give people options, then they actually have something to choose between. But if you make it difficult for people, there's a thing within psychology I talk about, which is like activation energy. It's the amount of energy to actually make the change, and it's not the change itself.
Ooh.
So it's like, for you to go to the gym, you need to get your trainers together, get dressed. So if you actually put your trainers by the door and you put your like outfit ready, the activation energy required to even make it to the gym, or like if you actually are a member of a gym 4 minutes away rather than 20 minutes away, the activation energy is less. Think about that in terms of the environment. How much easier would it be if we lowered the activation energy around recycling, so that recycling was actually the easiest option and not recycling was the hardest option? That would be like, then you're capturing the whole audience, that the group of the population that supposedly exists that truly don't care. You're still capturing them, because those people who truly don't care about the environment still want to live an easy life, as most humans do. So they will choose the easier option.
That's so interesting, because I mean, not to make this about bins, but my council at the moment, because I'm assuming because lots of people weren't using their food waste bin, they are just saying that they're only going to collect our general waste every 3 weeks, and they literally put a leaflet through our door that was like, if you don't want your bin to smell, maybe use your food waste recycling. And it was basically just like, we're only going to collect it every 3 weeks, so good luck. Hope you're recycling.
That's so smart, because actually I know the opposite.
Salty.
They make it really hard for us to recycle in my building, and like that's
really?
a building thing more than a like the council thing.
Flats, yeah.
But like, you make it difficult to recycle, that's a lot of motivation to not recycle.
Yeah, I almost think like when it comes to like activism can come to more like eradicating the friction for other people to act, because I think you're right, a lot of people do feel like they want to act, but instead of having like a shaming conversation with like all of your friends, look at ways that it can become easier. And yeah, I don't know, you're giving me lots of thoughts. This is really, really interesting. Would you recommend this book to somebody?
Yes, I think this
you would.
I would, yeah, because I think it's ultimately person based. Like, it feels like a very personal book, and like, especially if you are in the group that truly don't care, which I would not have placed myself in that group. This book is quite good at making you care. For me, it did have like interesting enough thoughts, and I must say, it being a short book, like, it's probably the shortest book I've read in the last like 5 years. Like, so the fact that if I look at it from like a time and energy perspective of like, how much time did reading this book take? How much energy did it take to read this book? And then also, have I learned anything as a result? I think if I read any book and I take away anything from it, it's worth that read. Even if I hate like 90% of the book and I take away 10% that I'm actually going to do something about or remember, then I think it's worth it, because I have a very like, take what resonates, leave the rest mentality. But I must say, the thought I had when I finished the book was, so it talks a lot about Mission 2020, and it's obviously 2022. So I googled it and I couldn't find it anywhere. Like, I went through 3 pages and I was like, did we meet 2020? Because I'm assuming we didn't. So
are we already dead?
To the point, I typed in Mission 2020 and it kept coming up with Vision 2020, and I was like, I have no clue what Vision 2020 is. That I was like, so was this publicised as much as it's spoken about in the book? And also, when we didn't meet the goal, because I assume we haven't, did it just get like wiped off?
Maybe. If I find the answer to that question, I'll put it in the description so you can find out, because that is a great question, and I also was avoiding Googling that when I was reading it, and now you're making me remember that I should have Googled it, because I don't know. I'm assuming things haven't gone that well. I know that like there's lots of ways that things are getting better, and there was a lot of like positive facts at the end of the book about things plateauing and less carbon.
So for context, Mission 2020 was to get it under 1.5%. Well, 1.5 degrees, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. That's not happened.
I could not find, maybe I must say I did it on my phone, and I did it like a bit haphazardly on a train, but like,
yeah,
it should be very easy to find, and it should have been the top link.
So I'm assuming it's a no.
Yeah.
Goody. Yeah, I think it's interesting this is the first climate book you've read, because I think there are loads of better ones out there. So I'm in some ways I'm like, no, I don't want this to be the first one. But then I'm also excited that you would recommend it to people, because I think there are good, one thing I think is really good about it is that it's got a non-Western perspective when you're actually hearing the quotes of people from non-Western countries. It's obviously through a Western lens because she is Irish, and some of the ways that we were talking about, I think there is a kind of showcasing lens to it that I wasn't completely a fan of, but I do like the kind of variety of different ways that it's shown that people have taken action that were really different. So I liked that, and I think that it did have a positive spin at the end. But like you said, I think what's when you read The Joy of Being Selfish, you'll see that Michelle has a very practical way of explaining things, and you even give text templates to set boundaries with people, and here's literally what you can say.
Because I say, when I'm writing a book, in a lot of author talks, I say, if you end a book and you go, okay, what do I do now? Then it's not a good non-fiction book. And so I will say, This is the best climate change book I've read. It is also by default the worst climate change book I've read, and I would recommend it because it's the only climate change book I've read. I also accept I have a very low bar. I think since becoming an author, I have set the bar very low on what I would recommend to others, simply because I hate people disliking my book, and so I don't like judging other authors, and so I'm like,
that's fair.
If you can learn anything from, that's how low my bar is. I'm like, if you can learn anything from a book, or you remember anything from a book, it's a good book. But only because I read about 100 books a year, and there are books I genuinely don't remember anything from the book, and I'm like, so that's my barometer. So take that recommendation with that all in mind.
Yeah, and I think as well, another interesting thing you were saying was it wasn't so much the book, but it was the fact that you were reading the book and then you were having conversations with people because you were reading the book. I think that's the power of books. It's not everybody doesn't need to read all the climate books, but some of us reading some of them creates this exponential conversation that you can just keep rolling with. And I think
from a life coach perspective, I am a person who's praise yourself for the low bar. I don't like this mentality online of bare minimum, that's bare minimum. You read one climate change book, woohoo, bare minimum. That doesn't create change. And so I'm a person who's praise yourself for the bare minimum. My bare minimum was I read one climate change book. And you know what? I was actually proud of myself that not only did I read the book, but I actually had thoughts about the book. And as a dyslexic person who really struggled in English class, I was I actually have not original thoughts, because original thoughts don't exist, but I had interesting things that I wanted to either know more about, explore further, and so it almost felt like a starter book where it was and I think maybe that's why it's good for a first time newbie to not feel like the world is ending, even though it slightly has that message in there, but to be okay, this is the start. But I think it shocked me, and this is really bad, but I'm quite honest and I don't care if you judge me, but I think it shocked me how much I enjoyed reading it. And I just thought I think the problem is when you're dyslexic, when you've grown up in school, and I know I'm blaming dyslexia a lot, but this is genuinely my reality. If you grew up in school and you were taught you were stupid over and over again for not having interesting thoughts about Tess of the D'Urbervilles or Macbeth, and that you didn't sit there and enjoy, what was the other one that someone was talking about the other day, the one that's meant to be the funniest book and the funniest book ever written. Was it Oscar Wilde?
Oh, was it The Importance of Being Earnest?
Yeah, someone said to me that's the funniest book ever written. I was we read very different books. I would say I don't know, the funniest book I ever read was The Couple by Helly Acton, which is contemporary fiction, a very easy read book. To me that's the funniest book I ever read. But when that kind of thing, it's very easy then to I stopped reading, I mean this is awful considering I'm an author now, but I stopped reading between the ages of 15 and 20 because everyone kept telling me I wasn't reading for my age range, and I was enjoying much younger books, and so as a result I always felt stupid reading. And now as an adult and from since being 20. So I started reading again, but in a very narrow niche of I love psychology books, I know non-fiction, and I had to baby step it into fiction again. Yeah, so then the first fiction book I read was maybe 3 years ago, was How Do You Like Me Now by Holly Bourne, only because she was a young adult author originally. Like, that's how slow it's had to be for me to not feel stupid while reading, that I was not going to pick up a highly academic book, and a lot of climate change books are like that, or even a book about climate change. And so, like, you can judge me all you want, but that's the reality of a lot of people who are overwhelmed by climate change.
Totally. And I think it's that you're like saying, like, removing the judgment is like part of that. And it's like, I feel like what we're learning is low bar, or praise yourself for there even being a bar. Baby steps, kindness. And also, actually, if I'm going to try and bring this full circle, the definition that she uses for climate justice and what climate justice is rather than like climate action is climate justice is putting people at the heart of the solution. So I think sometimes when you're not thinking about the people that you're talking to, and you're not being like, it's the people first, everything else second, then it can go awry. But this conversation did not go awry. This was really, really fun. Thank you so much for chatting to me.
This was so great. Thank you so much for opening my eyes and my world to climate change in general.
me alone.
You alone. You alone,
Me alone.
Genuinely. You gave me the motivation.
Yeah.
You lowered my activation energy.
Well, maybe we can persuade you to read another one. I think maybe a fiction one for you next.
Sounds
I think
good.
we need to chill on the facts, go with the characters, go with the feelings. It's good.
Wonderful.
Where can people find you if they want to hear more of your brilliant wisdom?
So I'm at Scarred Not Scared on most things, Instagram, TikTok, those kind of things. And my podcast is called In All Honesty, and my books are called Am I Ugly and The Joy of Being Selfish.
What a reading list. You're sorted. I actually would recommend, like, serving suggestion, like climate book, and then also one of Michelle's books, like as a little sandwich together. That's a healthy diet.
Choose one thing that you're going to do today. That's the main thing. It's like, bite size it. One thing. That's it.
Yeah. Low bar.
And praise yourself for it.
Exactly. Brilliant. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to watch more videos in this series, you can watch those here. Next time, we are reading this book with this person. I've been Lena Longs. This has been Michelle Elman. And we're very grateful that you joined us here on this non-book book club. Bye.
Bye.
Frogs dug out.